Okay, welcome back. This is our lesson on archaic humans. Where we left off last week, we had discussed the spread of Homo erectus across Africa, Europe, and Asia. This week, we are moving on to the species that appeared after Homo erectus, which are referred to as archaic humans. These species include those sometimes called Homo heidelbergensis, Homo antecessor, Homo sapiens neanderthalensis, denisovans, and Homo floresiensis. Homo naledi, a newer or more newly discovered species, could probably be included in archaic humans as well. As we saw last week, Homo erectus took crucial steps in the evolution of humans and in the human direction and defined a new adaptive level in human evolution. In this lesson, we'll discuss the hominins who continued this journey. Both physically and behaviorally, they were much like modern Homo sapiens, though they show several significant differences. So here's the outline. We do cover a lot in this lesson. It is in 6 parts. And there's a little segment at the end on Homo floresiensis. Mostly we're going to be talking about Neanderthals and a little bit about Denisovans, a little bit about discovering traces of these ancient species in Homo sapiens genomes. And we'll be talking about some physical differences and comparisons, and a little bit about culture as well. Okay, here we go. Archaic humans. Many of the hominins in this lesson lived through the Middle Pleistocene, a period beginning 780,000 years ago and ending 125,000 years ago. In addition, some of the later archaic humans, like Neanderthals, lived well into the late Pleistocene. So what we're seeing here is an overlap in dates between the later Homo erectus and some of the earliest archaic humans. Sometimes different specimens will be classified as Homo erectus, sometimes as Homo heidelbergensis and archaic human. So you are going to see some overlap depending on which textbook or source or lesson you're looking at. But this is because there was a gradual transition between these species. The hypothesis is that Homo erectus did evolve into archaic humans later. So these species represent more of a gradient probably than different blocks or different distinct species on different timelines. Here is our timeline again. We've got the Pleistocene beginning at 2.5 million years ago. You can see the early Pleistocene here, ending about 780,000 years ago. So, and then of course the late Pleistocene after that. And these are all kind of referred to as the Ice Age, early, middle, and late Ice Ages, you could say. The Pleistocene was a time that saw numerous glacial advances and retreats, which are called interglacials. So there'll be glacier advances and then interglacials, which is kind of like breaks between having these glaciers, basically. There were at least 15 major and 50 minor glacier advances in Europe during this time, during the Pleistocene. The hominins living in Europe and northern Asia were most affected by these climatic oscillations. As ice sheets expanded, the more northern areas of Europe and Asia became uninhabitable. As the climate warmed, migration routes, such as the one from Central into Western Europe, would have reopened. And I'm going to show you some maps of this in different parts of the globe. So let's look at Africa. If you were in class with me recently during lesson 11, I told you about how the existence of the Sahara Desert is depending on glacial ice. So when we have a lot of polar ice, the Sahara occurs. So it doesn't make a lot of sense when you think about an ice age being colder and then a desert opening up, but these ice ages and the formation of these glaciers sucks moisture out of the atmosphere and it freezes it. It traps it in this ice. So there is actually less moisture, less rain, less precipitation. So there are more deserts. As you can see in this map, forests and savannas would have shrunk and drier areas would have formed. So this is a snip or clip from an old textbook that I used to use, but nevertheless, this is useful information. Again, we've got the Middle Pleistocene. We're just looking at these definitions here. The portion of the Pleistocene epoch beginning around 780,000 years ago and ending 125,000 years ago. Then we have the Late Pleistocene, beginning at 125,000 years ago and ending at 10,000 years ago. Glaciations are climactic intervals when continental ice sheets cover much of the northern continents. Glaciations are associated with colder temperatures in northern latitudes and more arid, so here we're getting dryness here, more arid conditions in southern latitudes, most notably in Africa. So it would be interesting to compare this map that says Sahara at maximum extent with the current Sahara Desert and kind of see where we're at just using the Sahara as an indicator. That would be an interesting little exercise. So last definition here, climactic intervals when continental ice sheets are retreating, eventually becoming much reduced in size. Interglacials in northern latitudes are associated with warmer temperatures, while in southern latitudes the climate becomes wetter. Here is an example of this in Europe. So we're seeing this Scandinavian continental glacier form, and then we're seeing when it goes away that more migration routes into different parts of Europe are opened up. As you can see in those slides, the glacial advances and retreats would have changed the environments in Africa and Europe, as well as other places on the globe, dramatically. These changes would have changed the availability of food and migration routes, to say the least. Middle Pleistocene hominins were dispersed throughout the Old World, and Europe became more permanently and densely populated. Africa continued as the central area of hominin occupation, and finds have come from southern, northern, and eastern Africa. Middle Pleistocene archaic humans didn't vastly extend the geographical range of Homo erectus, but rather largely replaced the earlier hominins in previously exploited habitats, with the exception of the more successful occupation of Europe. So basically what that says is that Homo erectus expanded across the globe, and these archaic humans of the Middle Pleistocene didn't get much further than the previous Homo erectus, except in Europe. With the exception of Asia, where Homo erectus and archaic hominins may have coexisted, archaic humans appear after Homo erectus in the fossil record. The major morphological changes relative to Homo erectus are an increase in brain size, a more vertical nose, and a less angled back of the skull, or occipital area. And as I was mentioning at the beginning of this lesson, there is considerable disagreement on the taxonomy or classification of these hominins. Homo heidelbergensis is generally used for archaic Middle Pleistocene fossils from Africa and Europe that are dating from 850 to 200,000 years ago. Homo heidelbergensis was a transitional species between Homo erectus and later hominins, such as Homo sapiens neanderthalensis and Homo sapiens sapiens. Depending on what textbook you have, they may call these species or these specimens Homo heidelbergensis or archaic Homo sapiens.